Well, hello and welcome. I think when the British Academy began this series of events on the age of self, they probably knew that the culture would provide them with a new topical peg basically every day. And there it was this morning on the 7 o'clock news. Social media is the new smoking, says the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges. And a change in the law may come very swiftly after the consultation period ends tonight, I think. Like Cinderella, it's midnight tonight, I think. Banning, that's how the press put it anyway, under 16s from social media, which gives us an image of a possible future, doesn't it, of Instagramming behind the bike sheds and like dodgy shopkeepers who'll let you use their phone for a quid, that kind of thing. Now, we know the consequences of smoking. It attacks our lungs. But our worries about social media are slightly less material, slightly more abstract, about mental health, about well-being, but also about selfhood and identity. And tonight, our panel will consider those digital selves, our digital identities, and ask whether we truly control them, or if the technology we use to express them is shaping us more than we realize. And before I introduce you and the audience watching online to the panel, I want to invite everybody to answer our Mentimeter question. What an exciting word, Mentimeter. You can do this. There's a QR code through which you can register your response to this question. And the question is, have you ever posted something online and then immediately regretted it? Your options are, yes, all the time, yes, sometimes, no, never, or I don't know, I don't have social media. So we'll wait for those to click through. It's happening already, I think. And I'll introduce you to our panel. 3 professors, 2 fellows at the British Academy, all of whom work on the interface between human life and digital technology. Rosalind Gill is interested in power and inequality in the digital age. Her books include Perfect, Feeling Judged on Social Media. Yasmin Ibrahim is Deputy Dean for the School of Business and Management at Queen Mary University, London. And Danny Miller currently runs the MSc in Digital Anthropology and is Director of the Centre for Digital Anthropology at UCL, where he's coordinated research on smartphone use across 9 countries. Maybe I could, have any of you contributed to this government consultation, like officially or unofficially? No, you've not. Their voices have not been heard. I might now, if the results have come through, because we could have a look at those, couldn't we? I'll have to show my true short-sighted self and put my other glasses on to see these on the laser display board where they're written in tiny letters. I can't read that. Yeah, it looks like only. Okay, these are not percentage points, but we've got the majority. Is yes sometimes, very small number yes all the time, so their social media lives, people responding to this are not ruled by regret, 11 no never, and a very small sliver there for people who don't use social media. Maybe we could have a think about that first, Rosalind.
Well, yeah, interesting. I mean, from my research, I'd say that that is probably partly explained by the fact that once the sometimes being the biggest, that once you do that once, you start being really, really careful in the future because you don't want to do it again because the consequences can be really quite devastating.
So Yasmin, that's a map of people's, there's a cautionary tale in there.
And the kind of appropriation of social media into your everyday life, I would say,
I mean,
Danny.
It's actually a question that I do ask in part of my current research in North London. And I would say actually I get a slightly different response. But most people are saying that they don't particularly remember things that they have regretted. What I'm asking more is, have you posted something which then caused a problem subsequently? And actually, no, I find very few people, I mean, they will tell me about, they heard about somebody who heard about somebody where so-and-so happened, but it seemed to be relatively rare.
So we see enough of this online to, to know about this experience without having to endure it ourselves and learn from it. Rosalind?
Well, in a way, I have a slightly different view from Danny, which is that a lot of my participants did have that experience. They had experience of kind of encountering a lot of hateful speech, of encountering quite a lot of harassment, and also of kind of a constant sense of being judged. So even from their friends, even from the people that they felt closest to, they had this sense that they put something out there, it's slightly wrong, the caption isn't quite self-deprecating enough, or the image is just like slightly off in some way, and they feel like they're going to be subject to judgment.
I think probably we're dealing with slightly different kind of groupings, because this is something you're particularly focusing on, whereas I'm dealing in a sense with a random group of people that just happen to be there within studies that are actually focusing on other things. But I think that also you're mentioning things like being harassed and things coming from outside, whereas mine was quite specifically about the things they themselves had posted and the consequences of that. But also, to be honest, people are posting less. I mean, there's less actual activity out there of that kind. I think, it's interesting because we're talking about social media, but I suppose I tend to think, social media is just like, it's a bunch of apps alongside all sorts of other things that are going on. So in some ways, I think sort of things have moved on a bit from that. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's try and kind of understand what the sort of the topography of this question is. Yasmin, what impact do you think that social media has had on our sense of the gap between who we are and what we post?
I think one of the things that social media tries and, it wants you to have a profile. And it tries to make you work within its architecture. So in a sense, you are putting out yourself through the dynamics of social media. And so in many, many ways, you are trying to interface with the design. And so you could be a different person, but you're trying to narrate yourself within that sort of code that Lawrence Lessig would talk about. And in that sense, there's always this notion of you looking at yourself at the screen, and at the same time feeling that you're being watched all the time. And part of social media is both like a mirror, but it's also a screen at the same time, because there is something that you're doing to yourself in terms of presenting your identity, but at the same time, you're being curated and validated and endorsed by a lot of people as well.
What's the relationship between curation and authenticity? Are we who we curate ourselves to be, Rosalind?
I think that the sort of distinction between the kind of real in real life person and the fake online person is just wrong, is just mistaken. I think that we're always performing in every setting that we're in, and that just is to be human, isn't it? It's just like we are curating our performance for the context, for the people that we're with, doing what seems fit. But social media definitely are shaped by norms of authenticity, and I think like most research agrees on that being authentic is really the most fundamental thing that you can be.
But what I think I'm hearing here, actually, just to come in, is that there isn't some new emergent model of the self here, that we need to that we're looking at a development of ideas of the self that have been around a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the problems is comparing it with a sort of nostalgic view of what existed before the digital. And just to sort of further what you say, because I quite like to do the sort of other view, what if we were becoming more authentic? So the kind of places where we work, take somewhere like Japan, where there's such a strong etiquette about how you present yourself in traditional face-to-face relations. So people are saying that actually, because when you go online, you don't have all that long history of how you're supposed to act. And suddenly people are feeling they can act, more freely without all that kind of contrivance, etc. And so they would make the comments that, well, actually this feels a bit more natural than pre-digital. In China as well, people were sort of saying, well, you know, I always have this kind of formal relationship with my grandparents, and now online I see them sort of joking around it, saying, I never know they were like that. So actually, I think that, you know, we live in an age where we are now trying to have an ideal of like just being more natural in everything. So it's not surprising that things actually can move in that direction, and people will use the digital also to do that. So I would say this is actually not all one way.
I saw you nodding at that, Yasmin.
I think it's really easy to sort of collapse it all into how do we want to understand the self or present the self. But if you look at social media, it's part of this bigger assemblage of capitalism. And the self becomes a commodity also within that assemblage. And it really wants you to be active, to be in the sharing economy, to be posting all the time, to be a conduit for that kind of transactional relationship. And that complicates the notion of the self.
And what does it do to it? So that there is some sort of fundamental revision going on because of this technology?
Absolutely. And I think there is a lot of self-reflexivity, but can you completely withdraw from social media? And people have to be selective. There's a sense of agency. But we know that whatever we post is going to be abstracted in different ways. And that's something to be cautious about.
How cautious should we be, Rosalind?
Well, if I can just kind of answer that in a slightly different way, because I suppose I'm really wary about like making huge universalizing, generalizing kinds of statements, and my research is like very, very grounded in questions about inequality, about power, and I can only really speak from the research I've done, which is with, you know, very specific range of young people who were aged between 18 and 28. They were all based in the UK. They were extremely heterogeneous in terms of their gender identity, in terms of their sexual orientation, in terms of their ethnicity, disability, mental health status, and other things. And I think that the women in particular and some of the non-binary participants felt really under a lot of pressure to be perfect and to present themselves as perfect. It wasn't just about physical appearance, but it was about showing themselves as popular, happy, successful, just like this kind of imperative to be perfect all the time.
And what sort of pressure? Where did they perceive it as coming from? From the fellow users of these apps, or from somehow from the system itself?
From both. I mean, I echo what Yasmin said in terms of, like, we have to locate this in terms of a capitalist society. And a lot of this has come from consumer culture. It's also a patriarchal society. There's very, very long, very, very deep gendered norms. It's also a very racialized society. I think all of those things are incredibly powerful. And it comes from all those places, but it's kind of intensified in some ways online, because it's just that bit. It's just that sort of flat part. There isn't all of you to kind of fill that out.
Let's hear about your research in this area, Danny, because you have studied the online cultures across the world and how people are actually using them. You've observed them.
Well, I think, look, I fully respect the work you've just heard about and the way it pertains to a particular population. But as you said, it is a particular population. Now, we live in a more general world. I mean, in England, there's more people who are on pensions than there are children. So for me, the typical user could be a retired person. And we work with, Chinese factory workers. We work with Indian farmers. We work with people who would not be particularly characterized as living under capitalism or, in many very, very different systems. So my concerns would be elsewhere. My concerns would be the diversity of the usage. But, you know, the sort of retired people I was working with in Ireland simply would not look much like what has just been described. And I feel it's important not to think they are less authentic users of the internet. I think that we need this diversity of research in order both to have that depth of scholarship that we just heard about and to all about the problems of these young people. But my job is to widen it out and say, but wait a minute, what about Indian farmers and Chinese factory workers, etc., and make sure that we also bring them into the picture and understand, and in each case it's very specific, how they will use platforms and whether they'd have this notion of self, etc., etc.
And, you know, if we're a retired person in Ireland or a factory worker in India, do we have the same sort of relationship with that online self? Has the digital self, is it perceived broadly as something separate from some other form of self that's kind of closer to home, or are we talking about just something that's been integrated into our broader sense of who we are?
It's going to vary considerably. I mean, at the one extreme, so Chinese factory workers would have the use of the internet as a kind of fantasy world of becoming more modern, becoming closer to Shanghai because you're online and can be part of that world. Whereas, you know, retired people in Ireland, no, not at all. They're not concerned with you know, whether it's there, but they're using it to connect up with community, with their relatives, with WhatsApp groups, and so forth. And I don't think it's just another medium of connection, socializing, making community, and these issues simply would not arise in this way. So I do not think there is some kind of general nexus that we can say, oh, we blame social media for this. If anything, I would say it accentuates things that were already going on in that particular society or the particular ways things are going, and facilitates those developments, but they are different from population to population.
Is that true in your experience, Yasmin?
I mean, I would agree with that. You could create, you know, authentic communities, shared interests if you wanted to, but that doesn't preclude all the other kinds of tendencies that we have to deal with today. And that includes the sort of speed within which we've got to respond all the time. You're cued all the time on your smartphone. You're responding, you know, frenetically to it. And in some ways, the technology socializes us to react in certain ways. And no matter where you are, whether you're a farmer or a, you know, factory worker, those things remain in terms of the design. And so I would say, though that those things are contextually relevant, there's also the technological socialization elements that we need to think about as well.
And those technologies were more or less devised in the same place, weren't they? Is the fingerprint of Silicon Valley on this idea of selfhood, wherever you are in the world?
That's right. And what they want you to do is to be active, to be posting all the time, to have a whole profile shadow that also follows you with algorithms as well. So as much as we'd like to believe that you're curating yourself, the algorithm is also curating you and sort of pushing back all that sort of information and content back at you.
So how does California reveal itself in this, do you think?
In sort of that kind of uber capitalism, which is about branding, a lot of this self-curation, about transactional exchanges, and in terms of encoding it quite tightly with consumerism. And that's part of the way in which that is abstracted onto different platforms, but that's not to say that generative elements do not exist, do not coexist together.
Does any of that, the kind of the utopian element of the origins of this technology survive, do you think?
Technology came up, you know, this whole idea, the euphoria of the internet was to connect people. If I could go online, lose my body, be a man, do whatever I wanted to, reinvent myself, that was the euphoria of the internet. But with platform culture, we brought back the body, we brought back the identity, we brought back the profile, and we were at one point trying to, and we are still trying to sync our offline and online selves, even though our online selves could be abstracted differently. So yeah.
Danny?
I do have a slightly different view, as you might have guessed, particularly on what the technology, as it were, does and how we respond to it. I mean, I was involved, I think it was about 2013, when I suggested, Facebook had lost the youth. And nobody would believe it. How can Meta, with all its power, lose the youth? But it did. And now I think nobody would deny that finding. It came from, the world of the selfie to the world of community groups for older people. To give an example, a lot of the interest in technological effects has been the rise of the algorithm associated with TikTok. Douyin in China. And the point was that changed things from social media to the individual relationship of entertainment to the user. But what we're finding now is, from PhD researchers I work with, that people are re-socializing it because they liked social media, and they're taking it from the individualism that was really coming from the algorithm and changing it into different things. And a lot of the work that the people I study do shows people's ability, and we have this notion of smart from below, where people reject and say, we're trying to get them to use this particular platform, and they say, no, I'd rather use WhatsApp, and I'll find a way of using WhatsApp to do whatever it is you want me to do, but that's the one I'm comfortable with, so they're using it for all sorts of things that nobody intended WhatsApp to be. So I think it's a much more, it's a movable form, and actually a lot of what drives it is us. Yes, there's the technology there, but then if it was the technology, you would have homogeneity. You would have people in different places using it in the same way. If you don't, then it can't simply be causative in that way. It has to be more of an amalgam of that's what the companies want us to do, but actually in practice, we seem to do all sorts of things they never envisaged.
What do you think, Rosalind? Where does the power lie? Are we more kind of resistant to it and more chaotic than we might think?
It's a knotty one, isn't it? It's such a difficult one. I sort of feel like I want to agree with both of you, and I don't think that's actually contradictory, because I think both can be true. I think we can be, to use your phrase, that the algorithm is a sculptor and it does shape a lot of things, but there's also resistance, there's also creativity, there's also agency. I think both things are true.
And Danny, you have written about how people construct different identities on different platforms, and that's something that the people who design these things didn't quite bargain for, I suspect.
Well, they should have done, because look, we've always lived in platforms, surely. I mean, people do not behave the same way around the dinner table with their family, when they're on a date, in the office, as a student. A pub is a platform in that sense. You behave in a particular way as expected by that platform, as opposed to another space. So similarly, as we have a proliferation of online platforms, you have people using them for different aspects of expressing themselves or communicating with others. So now we have online and offline platforms. But I would say the key differences are not online versus offline, but things like particular genres of behavior, your relationship with your mother, or with your peers, or with the office, and how that actually works both online and offline. So I think now there is simply sets of platforms. There always were platforms, there are now new platforms, and we work with that, with all those possibilities. But I think these days it's not usually the split from offline to online that is necessarily the most important.
When we're engaging with these apps, Yasmin, how much free will do you think we're really exercising?
I just wanted to address one element of what Jenny talked about. And it's really the fact that our online and offline selves are entwined. They are entwined. And so even though there are universal elements that could be encoded in a platform, you have a cultural mitigation to it. So users are really sophisticated people. If you're accessing social media platforms if you're accessing social media platforms from a very conservative country, and women know, in terms of how do we negotiate that oppression, And so we're not talking about users as non-sophisticated people. And there are lots of opportunities to have that agency as well, and authentic communities, like I said. But it doesn't take away the fact that it's a very different notion of being in the pub and being on a platform when your data and your attention is going to be mined, and it's going to be used for third-party advertising, influence, consumerism. It's a complete different assemblage.
And what about this sense of like who is in charge of this? Are we using these things because they give us what we want and we like them? Or are we surrendering something of our will? You know, when people talk about doom scrolling, they're talking about something that feels like they don't quite have control over, but perhaps that's an illusion, I don't know.
Well, the whole idea of trying to make everybody stay online longer, to be transacting on platforms longer, and to sort of give your attention and engagement is the universal goal of platforms, because the longer you stay, I can create a sort of profile on you. I can understand your behavior, consumer behavior. I can understand your psychology, and I can then feed back to the consumers, to the sort of consumerist orientations in terms of advertisers, and bring that back in terms of third parties who are looking for that data as well. So it's difficult to argue that we could be entirely neutral about it, because there is a bigger, invisible machinery at work. You might call it capitalism, you could call it anything else, or cognitive capitalism, but it's there working all the time.
Danny?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose part of my job is to work out, what people care about and what they think about these issues. And then again, you get great differences. So when I'm working in this country, people are very concerned about what's happening to their data, uses of surveillance. They don't want any more than, in a sense, is necessary. They don't like the fact they have to tick these boxes, etc. When we're working in China, we find people say, oh, but a company might use the data. They said, but do I know these people? Are they going to tell my friends about what I've just said? Because if otherwise, I couldn't care less. And indeed, what we're finding is they're saying, well, there's clearly not enough surveillance. I mean, the amount of surveillance in China is incredible. But we find people say, there's just not enough. If the government had proper surveillance, if the companies had proper surveillance, there would not be crime. And the fact that there is crime shows we don't have the level of surveillance we want, right? So to some extent, I have to respect these differences. Not that I'm saying one is right, one is wrong, but we have to aware that different populations have very different attitudes to things like whether the surveillance is happening, whether they care about it, and whether it matters.
And how do the people that you've surveyed feel about that kind of thing? Rosalind?
Well, I think it's really interesting having this global perspective. But yeah, from my UK participants, they felt very concerned about surveillance. And yeah, they felt very surveilled, obviously, by big tech, by the platforms themselves. But they also, as I mentioned earlier, they felt very surveilled by each other. And that was equally a problem for them.
What, policed by other users, you mean, through
Very
comments?
much so, yeah. Policed and judged, and yeah, lots of hostile comments. They would really know if they got something wrong, and they were very, very fearful of doing that. There was also, it's really on a different scale to what you're talking about, Danny, because I'm taking it down to, very individual personal examples. But the sorts of things that people would say to me would be about like worrying about friendships going wrong, for example, like posting something and just having the tone slightly off and being taken the wrong way, or posting a picture that attracts a certain kind of, hostile, very, very misogynist comment. And friendships going wrong, but also interestingly, let me just finish that thought, which they said was kind of in contradistinction really to how they experienced their offline worlds, because they said, look, if that happened offline, if I was just in the pub, to choose the other platform example, then I would be able to work that out with my friend. I'd be able to say, oh God, I didn't mean it like that, and they'd be able to explain. Yeah.
We've got a sample of UK people in the room here. I'd like to ask two questions to, actually. Who here has felt trapped in a doom scrolling spiral ever? Do you know what that experience is like? That's probably about half the room, is it? Or maybe slightly less, actually. Okay. And what about this question of surveillance? Do you feel surveilled by your social media? I think that's more, isn't it? What do you, there's a sample for you, Rosalind. Pick the bones out of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's possibly not coincidental that we've just had kind of the whole Palantir kind of situation going back to news headlines and Sadiq Khan making the decision that he did, but very much bringing kind of the appropriation of our data and surveillance to the fore.
The appropriation of Tolkien, I want to say, as well. Why are they so good at keeping our attention, Yasmin? Why do I feel the passive-aggressive energy of the Duolingo owl so deeply?
Because a lot of it works with human psychology. They want to know how long you would stay on a content, and they use the psychology of gambling, where you may not anticipate the content at all, and because you are not sure what you're going to be looking at next, they use that gambling psychology to sort of push these content at you, and while you are spending time at it, then they get a better idea what your interests are. And so while you are curating yourself, you get curated in different ways because the algorithm notes how much time and engagement goes into the ways you are doing your browsing, how you're doing your shopping, what you are spending time with, and even your curiosity on a search would be looked at as part of your profile. And so when you talk about surveillance, we're not talking about, spies looking at it and, that kind of intelligence. We're looking at a sort of intelligence that is agile, that could be converted into specific data that could be resold the way they want to in terms of monetizing the self. And that's why it's interesting, because the market economics comes back to play, even with something very inane as doom scrolling. You think, I'm just looking at cats and they're so cute. But that's the reason.
That's not doom scrolling. That's something nice, that, isn't it? Yes. Danny?
Yeah, I mean, looking at it from because I tend to be with users, and actually, I think one of the key points is the malleability of social media and the smartphone. So they're unprecedented. There's never been anything like this. And what that means is you find that people are able to transform it into something very recognizable to themselves. So again, if you go back to my Irish work, you'll find somebody who thinks, they're the consummate professional, right? But actually they never succeeded very much in the professions in their work. But on the phone, even to pay a gas bill, they've got all these organizations and they link these 6 different sites. And they really see their ability to be a professional reflected back at them from online, or somebody with sort of masculinity that hates technology and manages to strip off every app they don't actually need. So it can be a very expressive form, and that comes with the algorithm. What you get a lot in comments is, the algorithm gets me. It really is amazing. It sort of knows what I want. And so, but that is, of course, you're right. So I'm not disagreeing what you're saying, but I'm saying the experience of it, one of the reasons people relate to it, is in a sense they are relating to themselves in an external form. It's the same with the therapy chatbots we were talking about earlier. There is a sense that this is something close, because, of course, it's been constructed, yes, initially by the companies, but a lot of it has come from you, and is there as almost in a conversation with yourself in this other form. And that's another reason why people find this very absorbing, because they find themselves somebody they want to speak to.
What about those other figures that have emerged from this culture that are not ourselves and are not really the tech companies, either the figure of the internet influencer? Rosalind, what's your reading of that being? Are they something genuinely new?
Well, look, we've had celebrity culture for a long, long time. We had the star system before that. But influencers, I think, they are often very disparaged. They're often very dismissed. And I think that's often to do with kind of gender biases and stereotypes. what I found was that it was almost as if like the influencer was becoming the kind of paradigmatic subject and was really, really influencing how other people used their social media. So we were all slightly coming to resemble influencers in the way that we practiced things. For example, you know, everybody would be researching the venues that they were going to take their photos in. They would be maybe even color coordinating their outfits with the colors of the venues. They would be using like almost professional. They always sounded like professionals to me when they talked about photography, and especially when they talked about editing, because they'd, you know, just like, oh, I don't really do anything. I just, you know, up the saturation, down this, do the contrast, do that. I was like, wow, my head would be just absolutely spinning because they sounded so professional, and then they were using all the different kind of editing platforms like Facetune and stuff. So I think they were coming to resemble influencers in the way that they created content. And Sophie Bishop's someone really interesting who's written about this, and she's got this concept of influencer creep. And it's this idea that influencing is just kind of creeping and spreading out and spreading across society.
So where do you read it? I think this is very interesting, and I think I can see it just in the way that people pose for photographs, the kind of postures they have. I think sometimes the kind of teeth that they go and get themselves as well. It is a kind of affecting how people look offline, the way people look online.
I think just in terms of influencers, the internet is sometimes faceless. It's a plethora of things. And sometimes you need to hook onto something that you can trust or resonate with or you identify. And it's not, you know, dissimilar to the way in which we live offline when we have people who influence you, whether in the school, in the workplace, in your friendship circles. So it comes through this notion of trust. You know, you trust somebody. And influencers initially in terms of their, you know, when the heydays of influencing, was all about that. People could convene around somebody else's identity, which they could either trust or feel secure with, I suppose.
You're putting the heyday in the past, I hear.
Yes, because there's a lot of cynicism about influencers as well. You know, we've had a lot of scandals with them because they could be doing all these presentational aspects and not be living up to the virtues that they represent. So
you think, I'm interested in the idea that this is something that's passing or has passed, because I can tell you that quite a lot of the, you know, British publishing and, you know, PR industry doesn't think that.
No, it doesn't, because remember the PR industry and advertising was tethered to the mass media at one stage, and there was a lot of waste going down in terms of trying to get your target audience. And now we can monetize and we can actually identify audiences and create a demographic profile. And for that, you do need your influencers.
Danny, what do you make of them?
I mean, I think 2 points. Firstly, the diversity of influencers. I mean, I'm an influencer in the sense that if in China, if you have more than, say, 50,000, you're called a Wang Hong. But I'm small beer because on the same platform that I'm on, there's the person who used to teach me anthropology when I was a student, Alan McFarlane, has 2 million followers. Okay?
How interesting.
Now, and we have totally different styles. I'm talking mainly about my work online. He's a sort of guru figure. You know, you can ask him about the future of civilizations or that kind of thing, and he will actually give an answer to that. So
you're big in China, is that what you're quite big in China, is that what you're saying?
In China, apparently, yes. So that's one kind of influence. If in India, the big influencers would be Islam and Hinduism, 10 to 30 million. Followers would mainly be religious figures. So there's actually quite a diversity of these people. But if we talk more generally, as in the previous comments, what it represents is this kind of personalization figure, right? And as I think you've also argued, one of the things we have to think about is it's replacing, in the more conventional influencer, not people like me, but selling cosmetics or whatever, they're replacing advertising, as was. And actually, if you think of it that way, you know, corporations spent huge amounts of money trying to manipulate us to buy particular things. And, you know, why on earth would we trust that? We wouldn't. So even if there's some ambiguity, as there obviously is with these figures, at least you feel compared to the older form of manipulation, the corporate advertising, you can relate possibly to a person and their preferences, and the idea that they might be a little bit more selective in terms of what they're trying to promote. So in that sense, it's not that personalization has a clear place in the way we relate to our own potential choices, purchases, and the rest of it.
What about the idea of authenticity and the influencer, Rosalind? Is that one of the qualities that people become followers of such figures?
Oh, definitely. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because, we can all look at different influencers and think, oh, they're so inauthentic or fake or like in some way repellent to us. And yet, if you're following an influencer, their authenticity is absolutely central to why you're doing so. Because they're looking you in their eyes, they're talking about their daily routines, they're talking about, their personal life, products they use, whatever. And authenticity is central.
So is that a genuine sort of connection? Is this something that feels like, is there any virtue in this, Yasmin?
That connection is called a parasocial connection, where the relationship you are building with the influencer is one-sided, but you come to believe you have a relationship with them. And it's not dissimilar from the kind of celebrity fandom that we experience. And this parasocial relationship gets amplified with social media because you could like somebody, you could follow them, you could leave comments, and that parasocial gets into a different domain in terms of the internet because of that interactivity in design and its dynamics.
Could we have a think about the future of this world? And where I've already heard that the influencer is dead or dying or lost their influence, which is very interesting. But can we look forward, and can we also try and make some assessment about how anxious we should really be about these phenomena? How can we talk about the things that worry us in the world of social media as far as our identity is concerned without feeling that we're probably in 30 years' time going to end up clipped on some documentary about, the equivalent of one of those about those funny people who thought wireless was going to kill the art of conversation? Danny?
I mean, I think if we're trying to update, you have to speak about AI. And actually, I'm now working on this thing, companion AI, which is how people relate to anthropomorphized beings. And I think actually, my prediction, for what it's worth, is this is going to be far more significant than social media. It's far more embedded in our everyday relationships. We think of it very much, and we're starting to think of it very much as a relationship or something that augments our other relationships, and it's coming in very fast. And I mean, I think, yes, we should always be worried about the implications of these things, but the lessons, I think, that come from the past is not to simplify it. It's not, is it good, is it bad? It will undoubtedly have contradictory. It will be many good things, it will be many bad things. We have to be nuanced, we have to be scholars, we have to look at the particular populations and try and work out what the hell is going on. More, actually, but we also have to speed up, unfortunately, because that is what's going on in the world. And, I mean, the stuff that I've been doing on AI, I mean, it really has been changing in the last few months. But, I mean, I think anxiety is not necessarily a bad thing because we don't want to be complacent about it, and there are threatening elements to it. Certainly are.
Yasmin, what do you think? What should we actually be doing?
I think all of us are doing something about it because we are conscious about it. And we are thinking about the time when we put in a funny search and we think, oh my God, I'm going to be associated with this, And so we are fiddling our settings, we are trying not to look at things that are in repeat mode, we are adjusting it to say, I'm not interested. You could do all that. But what I wanted to say about personalization is there's been a hyper-personalization because of the ways in which we can now, platforms can now take data from people. And this hyper-personalization has been used as this excuse to say, we are taking this data for your own good because now you're going to get content that's going to be customized for you. So a lot of this has been happening under this ambit of, I'm looking after you. It's all personalized. And if I didn't personalize it, you would get a lot of junk. We're already getting junk anyway, right? So I think that's really important to bear in mind. But beyond collapsing our worlds into a digital world, it's really important to think about, can we exist without it? Are we also still engaged as political subjects without it? Do we still have those conversations without it? Do you still call your mother without it? And those kind of things are really important, I think, in terms of engaging in the real world. I tell my students that, and I suppose that's something I imbibe by as well.
Rosalind, what would you tell yours? What would you tell the people in your study group, or what have you learned from them about revisions that you might want to make in your online life?
I guess what they told me was that they felt like they were really on their own with their struggles. So they basically felt as if there was nobody really helping them. Their parents' generation didn't get it. They'd had no help really at school. They'd had the sort of like standard internet safety, which was all about, stranger danger and that kind of thing. It just did not in any way help them to navigate growing up digital. That was one of the things they said very strongly, and so they felt quite alone with it, and that included not being able to talk to their friends because of the pressures to be seen to be doing okay and to actually be coping well. There was a kind of taboo around actually just opening up and saying, I'm really struggling with this and I don't know what to post and stuff like that. I personally feel that we're caught between two not very satisfactory kinds of options in terms of looking forward. So I think, we've got the social media ban scenario on one side, and to me that isn't somewhere that I personally think we should be going. And then on the other side, we've got the kind of media literacy type approach of like, well, just leave it all to the individual. Everybody can self-regulate. We're all getting good at this. And I just think neither are very satisfactory, to be honest.
Have you got a third option?
Oh, no, Matthew, I knew you were going to ask that.
Maybe somebody in the audience has it. I think this is the time to throw things out to you. I see a hand going up right down here, so a roving mic can come to you, and another one behind. So we have our first two questions, and here comes the mic to you.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to use social media in a way that doesn't irritate people as far as possible. Like if they follow me for something, they should not get something else. Like I use different platforms for different purposes, and Facebook allows you to like set different audiences and things like that. So just wondering, like, I don't think of that as authentic. Do you think as inauthentic? Do you think that is to like, I don't want, say to. I try to be the social media user I'd like to be. I'd like other people to be, basically. I'm just wondering if that is inauthentic.
Is that an example of authenticity or just another strategy? Rosalind?
I think that is perfectly compatible with being authentic. And I think that's basically, like you're a different person in a way on LinkedIn compared to who you are on Instagram. But even within your Insta, you've probably got multiple accounts. You've got your your account that's for best with all your best photographs and your best life. And then you've got, your hobby, your interests one. You've got your one that's just for friends. So it's just part of that. I don't think it's inauthentic. I think it's just curating yourself for relevant social contexts.
Thank you. Does anybody want to come in on that? Yeah. Let's have the question behind, yeah.
Hi, this is really interesting. I set up a campaign in 2013, the sort of start or relatively early days of Twitter, called 50/50 Parliament, to call for equal representation of women. Anyway, the point was that I found as an individual posting, it was very disappointing when you didn't get a lot of likes, and I'm quite an old person. And I guess my question is, given what they were saying on the radio this morning, and given the nature of social media being really addictive, I mean, I hardly use it now, but when you do start to use it, as you rightly say, there's content that's sent to you to try and keep you online. And I think the implication was, from what I heard on the radio, that this is more difficult, really, for younger people to have to cope with, and that the anxiety they feel when their content isn't being shared, I think it's very different for elderly people like us, you know, sorting out some sort of WhatsApp group. But for kids of 12 and 13 who are just sort of launching their identities and they're not receiving the likes and the affirmation that they need or want, I think it's very difficult. I mean, I experienced it myself, and I'm old.
That this is about the generational use, this, isn't it, really?
I mean, we were talking earlier, there's a colleague, Sonia Livingston, who works at, Sonia Livingston, who works at the LSE, and I just think she does really, really good research on this topic, and particularly this topic of, you know, how should we respond? Should we ban it, or are there other better responses? And my understanding is she doesn't support a banning. She actually thinks the answer is regulation, and she's done a lot of research. I mean, I think you would know much better than I would on this, but I tend to sort of follow her, and sort of, I think if she advises a particular policy, I probably would myself go along with it, but I don't know what your feeling is about that.
Well, do you want to come in, Yasmin? Sorry.
I would say in terms of the design of social media, a lot of it is hinging on validation from others. And that's part of the way the whole thing is structured. And your self-worth and self-identity could very much be dependent on how you are validated. And that's really important to tell young people, because that's a construction of the technology, of the platforms, the dynamics of power as well, because you think you're not popular if people didn't follow you or like you. But that's about monetization usually. If you're liked, if you're followed, if you're trending, that is about the algorithm thinking, how can I monetize this entity because they are useful for me? They will share things with other people, and that is important. But in terms of relationships, is that really that important is something we need to think about.
And I'll just finally say, Anna, thanks for the question. And I, really do agree that I think it can be devastating for all of us of whatever age, actually, when you post something and you don't get likes, for sure.
Okay, we've got, I think, 2 on the front row, but let's have 1 on the corner. Here it comes.
Thank you very much. This has been, my brain's been whirring away, but I have a slightly different question. When you said right at the beginning that under 16s won't be able to access social media, my question is about adults using their babies and children in social media posts. Where's the consent? And is that something that the panel think is like this box waiting to just open in, you know, when those children are older, what will happen then because they've not consented? And I was thinking about it from the capitalist point of view, because there's a mother who has a baby, she has over 1 million followers, and it's just baby content.
Yasmin?
A lot of the things we do, you know, a cup of coffee that we post, or a croissant, or going on holiday, those things become the fodder, you know. They can get tagged, they go into a big data pool. Nothing is bad in a sense, because if parents decide they want to show their children because they are promoting a certain lifestyle, and that would get endorsements, that's something that they have to make in terms of a personal decision as well. So yes, it's troubling, but that's the reality of lifestyle blogs as well online. So yeah, something really to be anxious about, I think.
Yes, let's pass the mic over.
Thank you so much. I'm actually an influencer researcher.
Sorry, that was me just trying to check how much time I had, because the clock has stopped. Are we? How much time have I got left? Oh, it's time to wind up. I think this is, no, it's not.
15 minutes.
You've got 15 minutes. I'm confused because the clock has stopped counting me down, and I thought somehow I'd gone over the time. Let's have your question, and I'll shut up.
Okay. I'm an influencer researcher, and before my question, I want to add that authenticity is not just is fakeable. So we can, through making stories, through looking imperfect, we can make some message authentic, a person authentic. So what if the person is not a real person, like an AI influencer, a virtual influencer? What do you think about the future of influencer marketing or communications?
Good question. Are you on this, Danny?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was making comparisons between influencers and advertising. Now, we've lived through decades of advertising. Were those real people? Were those actually people acting out of themselves? Or were they paid by corporations to represent a point? So I think that I would share your concerns, but I would also suggest this isn't some new thing that's about to happen. This has been the norm of how things have been sold to us for 100 years. I mean, I suppose I don't tend to use words like authenticity. I don't use words like real, to be honest. I mean, to go over all academic on you, I think books like Richard Sennett's The Fall of Public Man help us understand the history of how we came to start to believe that there was such a thing as the authentic or real, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's a very specific set of beliefs that came at a particular sort of historical time. So it's not one that I think I would share, because my argument would be that I don't know where that, we've always been in these performative platform, other areas. I don't think we could find a place where suddenly there's this real person that isn't actually mediated by everything that is around us. It's always been like that. And I would say, yes, I mean, advertising has always been like that too. It's always been a creation as though they were persons, but they're acting.
So the AI-generated influencer is just the new version of Captain Birdseye or Mrs. Ellswood on the pickle jar.
Well,
who I feel like I've had a long relationship with over the years.
and we will continue to do so. It may be more persuasive, it may be more personal. It's not going to be the same. But it's equally not entirely unprecedented. And I think that's going to be true of a lot of AI, that we need to get away from those two ideas. It will change things, but we can help ourselves understand it by thinking of the precedents.
Yasmin?
I think that it's very possible that that's the future, that you will start to have these intimacies with non-human objects, more so than before. And you can personalize it. You can make it say things, poetry to you at night. And that's really also thinking about the kinds of control we want on somebody else, but we can't have that, but we can have an AI. And so a lot of that frustration of living in modernity is displaced. And we create these imaginaries that enable us to sort of project that control. I mean, I'm sure Ross would have a whole theory on this in terms of gender and power. And I think that's a real possibility in terms of how we will negotiate our loneliness, negotiate relationships as well in terms of the frustrations and what have you. So, yeah, a real possibility.
Ros?
I think it's a great question. I think it's a really, really interesting question. I am surprised to hear your answer, Danny, and to hear you kind of like situating it, so much in a kind of long trajectory that we've already been through. Because I think it does raise really a lot of new questions and potential problems around inequality, power relations, labor relations, I mean, all kinds of things. And also it's not just the future, it's happening now. I mean, like AI models, AI influencers, work being appropriated, and the whole thing is built on extraction and appropriation of land and energy and water and people's labor, and it's not being acknowledged. And I think like the racialized aspects of it, the gendered aspects of it, the potential of these technologies to produce this sort of idealized version of somebody that, is very, very reflective of unequal power relations in the society we're living in. I think all that is really profoundly worrying. Do you have any thoughts on it yourself? I'd be really interested to know what you think.
What stage are you at with it, by the way? What do your research?
My research actually
Oh, let's get the mic back and then, yeah, sorry.
It's actually on parasocial relationship with AI influencers. I've had the literature review, and you can see that people are having connection with AI influencers, but it might be a wave like NFT. Like NFTs came and now they are gone. AI influencers. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind to start doing the research was my friends, the Gen Z friends, they're talking to ChatGPT like their friends, and they trust ChatGPT more than us. Like, I'm an experienced person, I've studied psychology, she can ask me questions, but she doesn't. She talk to ChatGPT like it's the consultant, like a nice friend, like a sister, but an AI influencer can be kind of same. So it also can reply the messages what you want to hear. I'm not sure, like the parasocial relationship, how would it go? It's kind of mystery.
Thank you very much. Danny, Mrs. Ellswood can't do that.
I'm gonna double down on my previous answer because I'm interested in the same thing, and I don't know what's going to happen, and I am worried about it. I think we need to follow it. But again, I think it's important to recognize, for 2,000 years or more, humanity has lived with religions. Now, if you don't happen to believe in that particular religion, it means that we have lived in a world of non-human beings and often considered those relationships to be the single most important relationships in our lives. The people we go to with all our problems, the people who guide every goal in life, the ideas that have produced vast theological complexes over hundreds of years. So I just can't dismiss that. I think that this idea that we live in worlds with non-human beings, at least for an anthropologist, is the norm of humanity. It's not going to be the same. We're watching it and we're seeing what will develop. But I do think it's important to situate that in it's not abnormal to be a human being, works in parasocial relations with non-human beings, because we always have done.
Would you like to reply to that, Yasmin, before I get another question? Because I see hands going up.
I think one of the things that we got to remember is that with augmented reality, with immersive environments, we are constructing worlds of make-believe. And they are there to enable you to suspend judgment, to create new forms of intimacy. And I get your point, Danny, about religion and what have you. It coexists with the kind of sordid reality that we might face. These imaginary gamified worlds are important as well, because this is where a different way of forming connections is happening as well. And it's not something that we can turn away from, because a lot of AI, AI-generated images, they're all coming from a whole database of data we are leaving behind. But that make-believe is part of the social platforms as well, because it enables you to sort of dispel some of your ways of connecting offline and imbibing new norms online.
Okay, we had one on the front row and one behind, so let's get the one on the front first and then pass it backwards.
So just from what was mentioned about both the sort of cycle and the process of users engaging and getting feedback and getting more engagement with the algorithm, and also people behaving more like influencers on these platforms, how much of a distinction are you drawing between ordinary users and influencers, and then in turn conventional celebrities?
Anybody? Ros, can you plot that one out for us?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I do think that the boundaries between those three categories are becoming really, really blurred. And I think, that in the past they used to be more clear-cut, but yeah, it's all, they're blurry edges.
It's often determined by the number of followers you might have. And that's really important for the metrics in terms of whether you're a micro influencer, whether you're a macro influencer, who are you able to mobilize in terms of changing opinion and influencing aesthetics and culture, I suppose. So there is a distinction.
Danny, you can tell us they're all the same
I
thing.
agree. I mean, completely blurred, really. I think now it's just a matter of scale, as you just suggested. And there's no clear lines. You know, when do you become sufficiently influenced that you're thought of as celebrity? I think that's gone. I think we just have scale.
Thank you very much. Just a disclaimer, I work in social media, so it does butter my bread. Are you an influencer? I'm not an influencer. Behind the scenes, working with the brands, it does butter my bread, but I know some of the challenges. And Yasmin, you made a point about engaging just as a person, a subject, and engaging as a political subject. But this time last year, I was actively deleting posts because I was going to Washington, and I was scared that some of my posts might have meant I wouldn't be let through, and I was going for an academic conference. I just want to hear your sort of comments and thoughts about that development of how social media can be politicized and weaponized in a very real way. And then the second point, I'm now doing a PhD in marketing. I heard the news this morning as well, we're streeting, but I found a lot of the support, the information given to support bands was quite anecdotal. And you guys are doing some great research. So how do you feel your conversations and outputs can impact this very current conversation that's taking place right now?
Let's tackle them both. Curating ourselves to cross borders. You know, some of us who thought we might never have to do such a thing. Yasmin.
Data follows you, you know. Things that you would have posted in a party nude or something follows you around. And you do have laws like the right to forget and what have you. And it's a real fear because you are doing something different from the time you were 10 years ago. And suddenly this data that you posted some time ago, liking something, becomes politically incorrect. And that's one of the biggest anxieties about social media because you have no idea when it's going to turn up. And so when we talk about anxieties, it's not the present per se, it's about how you have been tracked all along and where these things could suddenly emerge, and you see it with political scandals all the time. So yes.
Rosalind?
I totally agree. I mean, yeah, data will follow you, and I know so many friends who've been, in exactly that situation, rushing to delete stuff. Yeah, it's scary.
It'll certainly follow if you intend to stand in a by-election as well.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, I'm always going to try and put the other side, right? And actually, if we look at these by-elections and similar events, I mean, you're finding that people who proclaim they represent, all these good things, and you suddenly look at their social media and you see some of the incredibly nasty things they actually said in the past. And then you basically think, well, actually, the stickiness of social media isn't always such a bad thing. But I agree, that's probably a much smaller quotient of what we're talking about.
And the second question, perhaps we need to hear, could we hear it again, actually? Could we hear, if we could just get the mic back to you for a second, because you were, there was a second part to your question, wasn't there?
Yes, just to bounce off from the beginning, the current conversation that's taking place about social media, should it be banned? I heard a radio broadcast this morning, and a lot of the information to support the ban, to me, seemed quite anecdotal, as opposed to the empirical research that yourselves, and I'm sure a lot of the colleagues are doing. So, yeah, just a question of how your work and work that is similar can influence some of the conversations that are taking place.
Danny.
I mean, I mentioned earlier, the person I follow on this is Sonia Livingstone at the LSE. I think she's really good researcher. I think she has a very balanced view. She does work in policy, and she knows a hell of a lot more about it than I think I do. And so I would basically, but that's the point. It's serious academic research from somebody who I think has not got any particular axe to grind. He's just trying to understand what we should do, what governments should do outside of all the sort of politics and hype and things, and I think that's part of our job.
Yes, can we bother at this a bit? Because we do have the prospect of legislation coming in to limit the use of social media for under 16s, which again, what really is the evidence? And like, why not worry about like kind of what retired men are doing on the internet, for instance, who seem to make up the body of conspiracy theorists?
Yeah, I mean, I've already said that personally I don't support the ban.
But how well evidenced do you think it is that, you know?
I don't think, I mean, I think it's so contested, and you know, every event I go to, there's people making compelling arguments on both sides. I think, you know, Sonia's doing great work, as Danny said. I just think that there's also kind of a bit of an opportunity cost with the whole sort of attending to the idea that a ban is the thing and the way to go, because I think like it just means that we're not having the other kinds of conversations that we could be having. And it's not just a technology, it's also about, you know, the ownership and control of these platforms. And imagine how different it would be if we'd kind of got these technologies and they were collectively owned and for the common good or something like that. Like those kinds of questions I just feel are never reaching the agenda. It's all about, shall we ban it? And I just also want to say, you know, I know it had lots and lots of attention in the debates already, but, you know, one of the reasons for being concerned about the ban is just like what that will do for young people, genderqueer people, LGBTQ plus people in rural areas who aren't in urban areas where they can easily connect. Just what it'll do to people that are already feeling marginalized and then don't have access to online social media as a resource.
I think we've got time for a couple more. Have we? Yes.
Oh, hi. I'm an educator and I work with parents all over the UK.
Well, I think your mic's not on.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I'm probably not being loud enough. I said I'm an educator and I work with parents all over the UK. I do really appreciate that you are giving different opinions on the panel. I think that's quite good. Now, my question that I want to ask is about identity and young people. And in fact, I would like you, the panelists, please, to send a message. What message would you want to send to parents? Because I look at a lot of what's on social media, and you hear a lot about AI and the impact on children's brains. And I work with a lot of children, and I would say social media has had a greater impact on the children than AI, because a lot of the children are not using AI. So what message would each of the panelists, if you could send a message to parents, what would you want to message would you think would be useful?
I don't know. Do you give advice? Do you give advice to parents?
I'm just grateful all my kids are adults now, so I don't really have to give that advice. But what I want to say is that children as subjects have always been treated as vulnerable subjects, that the society has to take extra care in protecting. And that's not just with social media. That's with all kinds of media, really, if you think about it. And it's with television. You can't, you know, children's content are heavily monitored as well in terms of Ofcom. So in terms of social media, and I'll go back to the evidence bit, a lot of case studies have been done on how it affects children, the kind of trauma it has induced. In Australia, they've already done it. So it's not coming without that evidence. We also know about gamification and addiction in young children, where they have to be sent to detox camps in China, Danny. And so this is a real thing. But whether I have advice, I think it's really individual in terms of, you know, what parents do. But there is a social responsibility to protect young people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that our role is really the responsibility of academics. And academics' job here, I think, is to try and get beyond the generalizations and the big claims and try, and as far as we can, to do the research that drills down and considers the complexity of these kind of questions. So it may be, I mean, in research I do, I find that sometimes people who have particular levels of education, then they have a very different relationship to what's going on online with people who, let's say, have anxiety because they haven't had those opportunities, or if they're, as you said, in marginalized communities compared to mainstream. There isn't just a thing called children and parents. There are many different groups out there, and the impact of any kind of policy, etc., will be different. Now, our job is to sort of say to policy, etc., which they don't like to hear, that actually it's more complex than this big generalization. We've tried to do a decent study, and that's brought out that things like age then is also hit by, you know, status or places you come from or whether you're a migrant, etc., 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 and complicate the picture so that actually these things can get more nuanced when they're put into policy. I think that's what we try and do. Whether we listen to it is another matter, but because I think it's the truth. The truth is it just isn't that generalized, and it's not that simple, and these different communities are different.
Rosalind, what do you think? We're running out the clock a bit here. There's one more thing I want to ask of all of you, but what are your thoughts on this?
I think that, yeah, I agree with Yasmin that children are vulnerable and that they do need our protection. I just don't think that banning social media for them is the way that we operationalize that protection.
We've come to the end of the event now, but there's one thing I'd like to ask you all to do, and that's to tell us what you think we should be thinking about, what you want us to take away and chew over on this question. Yasmin.
I want people to think about the ways in which power socializes us, enables forms of content to be considered as knowledge, and how discrimination and inequality can creep back into the very things we thought were clean of it. So, you know, it's not a neutral space, it's an unequal space, and historical legacies of oppression come back. So wake up and have a really clear look at that.
Danny?
Yeah, I suppose what I've tried to suggest is that rather than extrapolating just from our own experience, the more aware we are of the diversity of populations out there and their experience, the better, and really how much we can learn from them. Because I think in some ways what social media does is sort of democratize the possibilities of creativity. There is so much being done out there from which we can learn a great deal, and that's where I would go.
Rosalind.
It's kind of on a theme of learning, and I think it's just about the importance of listening. Just listening to young people, listening to all people, and like, it's a very old methodology. It's not very kind of creative methods and all new and flashy, but I think listening is still really fundamental.
Thank you. Well, this has been the final event in the Age of Self season. We're going to return with our next season of free public events in autumn 2026, so sign up to those. You can scan the QR code, which is above my head here, and then you can keep up to date with everything. The events team here is very keen to hear what you thought about this, so do fill out the feedback survey form if you have time. And the British Academy Ideas Festival returns on Friday the 19th and Saturday the 20th of June. So visit the website to find out all about that. The bar, I'm told, is open for the next while. But before that, please, could you thank our panelists, Yasmin, Danny and Rosalind.